Hello, we are back for our second national town hall to talk about voting and all things related to voting, this really important democratic process that allows us to choose our government. And so I think it's worth noting that this is a very historic period of time. This is the 100-year anniversary of women voting. So important. I'd also like to give a shout out to the state of Wyoming, who was the first place in the U.S. To pass a woman's suffrage measure in 1869, which led the way to this anniversary. That suffrage didn't pass until 100 years ago, as of yesterday. So yay, yay. I think it's also worth noting that let's make sure that all of those women are voting. 40% of eligible voters in this country do not vote. Now, this is the 100-year anniversary of women being able to vote. Please, ladies, get out there and vote for whomever you want. Just make sure to vote. You know, this is an incredible privilege that we have in this country. Let's make use of it. And so we're joined here today with my running mate. I'm Brock Pierce, running for president of the United States of America. I'm joined again today by my running mate, our vice presidential candidate, Karla Ballard. Good to see you. And Brittany Kaiser, our campaign manager, our whistleblower, our data, how data affects elections. And, you know, we hope to impact this one and the elections to come. And we are joined today by Nick Spanos, who, if you've been following our campaign, you haven't seen his face yet. And so I'm glad and pleased to be able to introduce Nick Spanos. Nick has had a long history, for those in the blockchain, of supporting everything we've been doing, opening up the Bitcoin embassy in New York City, right next to the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. What an exciting thing that was in the early days of crypto. But Nick's been in the political world for a very long time. Nick, could you please introduce yourself and tell us all of the amazing things that you've done to support our political process?
Yeah, Bitcoin Center. Oh, I got to turn off.
Sorry, the Bitcoin Center. Excuse me. Thank you for the correction.
Okay. I've worked in politics in the past, and that's how pretty much I found my path in life. I built a computer at a young age, and I sold political voter registration data, mailers. I made labels because no one had a computer, and politicians would send their mailings out to their constituents, their potential voters. I worked on many campaigns. I worked on Paul Tsongas's campaign in New York, and in the primary, presidential primary in 1992. I worked on Democrats and Republican races. I ran a bunch of EDO for Cheney in Broward County. Pataki, I did EDO. I've been in the political sphere a long time. I was a director of voter contact, and I ran phone banks and data for Ron Paul. Both times he ran for president, I helped out Rand Paul. I keep telling myself that I'm going to get out of politics because it's high stress and all these things, but they keep Brock pulls me in here. I'm very happy to work on this campaign. It's a very important campaign. I think everyone has to realize that we're talking about women, and women have a lot to do with this. Back in 1992, Ross Perot became very powerful as an independent candidate because the League of Women Voters were the ones who ran the presidential debates. But then when they saw that Ross Perot became so powerful, they made a rule that they made a committee of presidential debates in the House, and the committee says there's one Republican and one Democrat in that committee that decide when and where the debates will be. So since then, since 1992, there's never been a debate with an independent candidate with other party members for president. And I think the women should be upset with that. All women in the country voting should be very upset with that because it used to be the job of the League of Women Voters. And I think this is something that we should push out in the world, that the on the 100th anniversary of women being able to vote. This is the perfect time to push that out in the diaspora, out in the Twitter sphere. And that's my introduction. I'm sorry, I rambled.
No, thank you. And so, Nick, you've been in politics for basically as long as I've been alive. We're so glad to be joined by you and that wealth of experience and all of those lessons. And thank you for raising that point that the League of Women actually decided who got to participate in debates until 1992. And during that time, women enabled independent candidates to participate in the debate. I agree with this 100-year anniversary. Let's encourage that again. I think we need more than two choices. And so anything we can do to facilitate that, I think, would be great for this country. So I think it's worth talking about let's stay in the past for a moment and talk a little bit about voting issues and other issues of discrimination that we continue to overcome. What are they? Are there any points in particular historically that anyone wants to raise?
Absolutely. I think what is so important for us to point out is that voting is the way that we uphold our democracy. Our democracy is meant to be participatory by design, and therefore the way that we keep our democracy strong is by participating. And as Brock so rightly pointed out, historically, not everyone has had the right to vote. We've overcome many hurdles from different groups of people like women and minorities not having the right to actually show up to the ballot box and vote. But since we have been able to overcome those hurdles, we're still left with a population that is very apathetic towards participating in the political process. So after spending the past few hundred years getting to a point where everyone actually has the right to vote now, we still have seen in the last election, where we didn't have the hurdles of COVID, historic lows for different demographics coming out, less people voting than ever before. And you can make all the excuses that you want about how exciting those candidates were or were not last time around. But the truth is, we do all have the right to vote now, technically. Now, it's important for us to look at some of the historic hurdles that we still haven't gotten over. And that is that in many states, a lot of individuals are still blocked from voting. In over 36 states, you're required, even if you're already a registered voter, to show up with a certain type of photo identification. For many people, especially in these times, it's very difficult or expensive or time-consuming or confusing. How do you get a new photo ID? And it's very expensive, of course, to get a passport. And in some states, you have to prove your citizenship. So unless you have your birth certificate or your passport with you, then you also cannot vote. We've had historic issues with voter registration timing, that people show up to the voting booth and they didn't know that they had to register perhaps weeks or months before that in order to participate. So even though every citizen of the United States is now allowed to vote, we still have a lot of historic voting laws that we haven't been able to update, where access to voting, even if you have the right, is still very difficult to exercise. And now that we're in a time of COVID, we have so many more hurdles. Even if you have voted before, you probably have never ordered a mail-in ballot, an absentee ballot. We also have seen that a lot of mail-in ballots get thrown away because they are not filled out properly. So do we think that everyone in the United States is ready to order their mail-in ballot on time, to fill it out correctly, to get it in on time? And even if everyone gets it in on time, can our mailing system, can USPS even get all of the ballots registered in time? Even before there were the last weeks of issues with USPS actually cutting down their budgets. And we even saw something that I think shocked the nation, that there were mailboxes that were being removed from towns all over America. Before we're even dealing with that, USPS told us that if we have a mostly mail-in election, that they didn't think they had the capacity to deliver that logistically.
Well, Brittany, I want to follow up with you on a before we go too far from the history. ACLU put out some really interesting stats that I want to make sure that everyone here is aware of. In 2004, the participation gap between white and African American voters in 2004 was 6.9%. In 2008, it went down to 0.9%. 2.1 million African Americans cast ballots in 2008 to 2004. That was a monumental historical moment that we have to really recognize and take into account. But then here's what happened. You saw voter suppression legislation skyrocket. And that's what we're facing now. And that's what many of us in the African American community, in the Latino community, have had to deal with, right? Once those numbers peaked up, now the laws are starting to get passed to go ahead and suppress it once again. And so we have before us an incredible opportunity to put aside partisan dialogue and talk about the powerful, Brock, as you talked about, moment that we have to be able to go out and vote for a candidate, whoever the candidate may be. But these numbers are important for all of us to recognize and realize. And there were certain states that really started to create voter suppression laws. So I want to make sure we lay that out on the table, especially because when you start going into hyper-local communities, there are all sorts of ways that we can, begin to suppress the vote. So I just wanted to make sure I shared that with the audience.
Well, I hopefully you don't mean we. Our objective is to get everybody to Brock or Rock,
Right.
and to recognize how privileged we are.
Absolutely.
And how important a responsibility this is to participate.
Absolutely.
And so I think the biggest issue of all of them is the fact that 40% of eligible voters are not voting. We're going to create some explainer videos and point you to content. So follow us on YouTube or Twitter or wherever it is that you prefer. And we're going to make sure to get you the information you need to understand how to register to vote, how to get the mail-in ballots, how to fill those forms out. This is basic stuff, educational stuff that we all need to know. And so I promise that we will get that content out to you as soon as possible, steer you to the right sources, make some of our own, because this is the most important thing we can do as Americans is participate in the process. The future is going to happen to you or with you. And especially if you're not happy, if you don't think the system is currently serving you in all the ways that it can and should, make your voices heard. Make your voice count. And so
I was going to say, let me share an incredible website with you guys, vote.org. Vote.org. Right now, as Brittany talked about, we are having challenges with mailboxes being picked up and people wondering where in the world are they going. And they would always be able to walk to that mailbox and it's no longer there. Vote.org has done an extraordinary job in providing step-by-step resources to know exactly what you need to do to make sure your vote is not only counted, but that you have a way to access the paperwork to get that vote.
So
yeah,
true.
I've had experiences. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Nick, please.
Yeah, I've had experiences with the post office in the past. I've had one of the machines. I ran an insurgent campaign against in the Democratic primary in New York against the machine, and we had mailings that we were sending out, and we put them in there 3 weeks, 4 weeks earlier, and they held all our mailings, all our bags of mail under a counter till the day after the election. That's when they put our mailers in. We're talking about 40 bags of mail. And so when people say, oh, the post office is not set up to do elections. You can request an absentee ballot and hopefully the ballot gets mailed to you and hopefully they mail the ballot back. But the post office is not trained to do elections. I'm not sure why mailboxes are disappearing, but I think the whole thing's, I'm not sure what's happening, but I would not personally. My opinion is, the post office should do what it's been doing. It's had problems in the past also, and it's very difficult. For a few cents, you give a piece of paper to someone and it shows up on the other side of the country. It's pretty crazy. But I think we have to be very focused on the fact that they don't count votes and they don't collect votes. They move the mail. So the Board of Elections in every county count the votes, and they have incredible problems doing that also. So I don't know if you could change horses, the system midstream. I'm not sure. I don't think it's going to, whatever. Sorry.
Well,
that's my opinion.
Yeah, well, no, we have a lot of issues, right? In voting suppression, and it sounds like there's not a lot of clean hands.
No.
We've got systemic problems, with voting. It's worth taking a moment just to explain in the presidential election how voting works, because some people think that maybe the election is a popular vote. The popular vote being how many people voted for one candidate. The person that receives the most votes doesn't win. That's not how our electoral process works. The presidential election is decided by the Electoral College, the Electoral College vote, meaning that it's, with the exception of 2 states, it's winner take all. So if in one state we get one more vote than the other candidate or other candidates, we win that state. So it's not based upon population, it's based on a state-by-state basis. And each of these states have a different number of votes allocated to their state. The big states obviously have a huge influence over the Electoral College, and the smaller states, like the state of Wyoming, which helped enable women voting, is a state that has 3 Electoral College votes, for example. And so to win the presidential election, you have to win a majority of the Electoral College vote. So this is an interesting thing that we keep bringing up, because this is, in fact, our strategy. You don't have to win the election to become president. This is an interesting thing that happened in the year 1800 and 1824. Other than those 2 dates, there's always been a winner. And so what happens is, if 2 parties were to tie, if you know that HBO television show Veep, this is what happens in their season 5. There's a tie, and so there's 538 Electoral College votes. And if there was a tie, it would be 269 to 269. You need a majority, so 270 or more to win. And so in the year 1800, there was a tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, Karla's great-great-grandfather.
Fifth generation. Yeah.
5th generation. And so Karla is a descendant of Aaron Burr, who was part of that historic tie, the only time it's ever happened in U.S. history. This was the year 1800, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. And another example is, if a third-party candidate, such as ourselves, were to win one state, it becomes possible that no one will get a majority. If a third-party candidate were to win 3 states, it becomes likely that no one would win the election. No one would get a majority of the Electoral College vote. So that is our strategy. We are not trying to win the election on November 3rd. We're shooting for bronze. we're trying to get 3rd place, meaning we want to win 1, 2, or ideally 3 states. And so then the question is, what happens if no one wins? If no one wins the election, up to the top 3 candidates that have at least 1 elector are given to the House of Representatives, and then the House of Representatives chooses the president, with each state getting 1 vote. And so there's 50 votes. So whichever candidate can get 26 states to vote for them becomes the next president. And here's an interesting fact. Every time the House of Representatives has had to choose a candidate out of 3, they've always, 100% of the time, chosen the 3rd place or bronze candidate to be president. Mm-hmm. Now, that's only been once. It was 1824, but we do have precedent on our side. Every time it's happened, the 3rd place candidate has been president. And it would be, in this particular instance, it would be a compromise, because it'll be very difficult for the Republican states or electors to, vote for the Democratic candidate or ticket. And it would be very hard for the Democratic ticket to cross the line. But there is a possibility that a compromise could be reached and choose the nonpartisan candidate. So that's one thing that we'll also get into in the future educational content that we produce for you. Anything else that we want to talk about historically before we can really start digging into issues like what's going on with USPS right now? I'll also talk about, actually it's worth noting, because one of the things that we can do is show you, we're now, inside the heart of the beast, right? We can give you an inside view of what happened. And this is stuff that the press, the media isn't really reporting on. And Nick, I believe you're in New York right now. Brittany and I are in Los Angeles right now. And I'll just touch on these two places to start because it's rather shocking. And so obviously we're living in COVID. We've got the pandemic. A lot of business and a lot of non-essential services have been shut down. The city of Los Angeles doesn't believe that democracy and this election is an essential thing. You are not allowed to work and go into the office and run a campaign right now, which looks to me like something that is rigged.
Well, they don't want to get fired.
Well, it feels like
get fired. So they want to keep us home so we don't come out and fire them because they're already in office.
Yeah, no, the beneficiaries of that are the incumbents, right? Whoever is in power is likely to stay in power if, other campaigns are not allowed to run their campaign. So it being an election year, I think democracy is essential. Tell us what you think. The city of Los Angeles does not think democracy is an essential business. I have a firm opinion that it is.
And on that point, I'm just going to remind everybody that if you do have questions for us, go to the bottom of your screen, those that are participating on Crowdcast, and please put in a question or upvote another question that you like, because after we touch on a few more topics, we'll open it up and start addressing those.
Yeah, because this is meant to be a conversation. This is an invitation to participate. You've got 4 of us leading this conversation, but it is important that you all participate. And
why Brock and I are doing what we're doing, right? Is holding this platform so we can hear from you. Nick, I have a question for you because we had such a good conversation yesterday. And I would love for people to understand a little bit more about your history regarding making sure that the ballot machines are working, how that process works. A lot of folks don't get that understanding of what does that look like. Right on.
I'm having flashbacks when you just bring it up. So there's a position called EDO. It's Election Day Operations Director. And I used to get that job a lot because of my job would be to make sure that no one would steal votes. So how that works is you get a room full of lawyers. You give them a little paper briefcase with a bunch of lawsuits in there. Because what happens is if someone is doing some shenanigans at the polling place, usually the person who runs the polling place, what happens is they just point at you and the police officer locks you up because they're only listening to the person who's running the polling place. So that's why we would get the papers ready. We would get the papers ready and say, hey, what's your name? Because I want to put you in this lawsuit. And then at least there's some kind of leverage. So what we would do before the election started, we'd go and inspect all the machines. So there's a bunch of basements and a bunch of different, county board of elections that the machines are in, and we go inspect them. We take the number down, the serial numbers, make sure that they're all. There's a public counter. We write down the public counter, and we'd inspect all the machines that have these numbers, and then we have poll watchers at each polling place, and they would go and see that the public counter, which is like an odometer in a car, the odometer is the same number that it was when you started. These are the mechanical machines and also the digital machines. So New York, we had mechanical machines, and I would go and inspect all the machines in New York City, believe it or not, and then I would have my tough guys, people that would be able to have the guts to go and say something to the person who's running the polling place that something's going on. Not tough people, but we would embolden them to be able to fight for democracy. because otherwise, you know, if you're timid and you're sitting in a corner, oh, they're doing something, that doesn't work. You got to actually stand up and say something. So because I did that so many times, and I would make sure that there weren't any revolving door polling places, because what happens is if they could get even one place that they could run a lot of people through,
Right.
those people would get run through this bus. I don't even want to say this, but I've seen bus loads of handicapped. I don't even know what it is. I've seen bus loads of handicapped type, you know, people that were in wheelchairs and stuff like that, and they would go from one polling place to the other, and the person would walk them into walk with them and vote for them, and then they'd get back on the buses and go to another one, and that was something that happened in the election I ran.
Wow.
Most of the EDO in Broward and Palm Beach County, Florida, in 2004, and something like that happened. Whatever, I got into a scuffle, but she just lost her job just recently, so I'm not going to say her name.
Mm-hmm.
And all these things really happen, but it only happens when there's a contested race. If there isn't a contested race, it probably nothing happens. But when there's a contested race and you can be identified, so I ran a Greek race in Astoria, Queens for state senate. So what happened was right away they cut the district in half, and they split the Greek vote in half right off the bat. And then all the names that were long, like the Greek names that are long, they ripped them out of the signature books. So in New York, it's easy. You don't need an ID really to vote. All you got to do is sign the same signature that's in the records, and that's the way they authenticate you. And but all the long Greek names were ripped out of the book. So people would say, hey, I voted here for the last 40 years. I voted for Nixon here, or I voted for, you know, Kennedy here, and now I can't vote because their names were missing, because they could be identified and the machine didn't want them. So I think in this election, people can be identified. People wearing masks all the time might be more liberal than the ones that are not wearing the masks are probably on the right side of the fence, and the ones that are, you know, wearing the masks, let's say the ones that are not wearing the ones that are wearing the masks are probably on the left side, and the ones that are wearing the red hats, of course, would be on the right side. So they're identifiable. It's going to be a close race. In the states where there's going to be problems, where it's a tight race, is where you're probably going to see things happen. These things might not even be planned, but the ladies who run the desk where you go and get your ballot to run through the machine or something, if they can identify you one way or the other, they don't want to lose their job. So they might just say, oh, your name's not here. Then you have to go to a judge and get a yellow slip to come back and vote. Or they might say, oh, we're going to give you a provisional ballot. A provisional ballot is bullshit. You need an emergency ballot that has a serial number on the envelope. If you don't have the serial number on the envelope, it's not a real ballot. And if there's no poll watchers there to make sure that those ballots actually get counted somewhere or somehow, depending on the protocol for that area, yeah, I mean, the whole thing's a mess. There was a Athenian constitution back 300 years ago, actually had a drawing of the voting apparatus and what you had to do in it. We don't have that here. So I don't know. We need Brock to fight and open his mouth, because all these other people, they already have their, I'm sorry. They already have.
Great. This was great. And this is why Brock and I are holding this space. And this is why we're both committed to identifying what the problems are and beginning to create that pathway towards solutions and innovative solutions. Brock, I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, I think it's worth, I think we've identified some of the problems. And that is that, we've got issues with the process of voting and votes not all being collected, ballots not getting where they need to on time through USPS and being collected correctly, mailboxes being picked up and restructured in the middle of an election, which looks a little suspect to me. What I heard, though, and I think that, anyone that is close to the situation, our process of voting is not functioning as well as it could. Now, the good news, is it's the year 2020, and we have technology, technology that could possibly solve these problems. One of those solutions is one that we have a fair amount of experience with, and that is blockchain-based voting systems. The question is, just for those that are not familiar with blockchain and its main attributes, what blockchain does is it makes it so that digital information can't be two places at once. You can't copy and paste. That information can only be one place. So as we start to solve digital identity issues, we can really start to ensure the integrity of our voting process, that one person has their one vote, and we'll be able to do that digitally. Because I think the bigger issue is we've identified is that 40% of eligible voters are not voting. So protecting the integrity of the process is very important, but reducing the friction to allow more of us to participate in the process is an even bigger issue. And I think that blockchain-based voting can solve for both of those, making it digital, making it easy, and making it trustworthy. Ensuring the integrity of that process is something that blockchain can do. Blockchain-based voting is being tested in 5 states right now. And so it's starting. And depending upon how much noise we can make, we could be looking at an election in 2024 with a substantial number of states, migrating into a high integrity, trustworthy process. And by 2028, we might see all of it happening. So, Nick, it's worth passing the mic to you for a moment, because don't you have a patent on blockchain-based voting? Can you tell us how this solution to our problems?
Yeah, I have a patent, awarded patent, not just an application, but I have an awarded, granted patent on blockchain voting, and there are certain different iterations of it. I believe that paper is going to survive in voting for a long time, and that's why I've also integrated blockchain with the paper ballot, because people, they invest their time in coming out and voting, and they're enrolled in the process, and they want to understand how the votes are counted. And of course, the votes work through my blockchain process. And but it's first they put their X on the piece of paper. So even if nobody believes the electronic stuff, they can go back and count the physical ballots. The ballots would get wrapped up and certified. But then, because let's say someone who doesn't understand anything about computers or anything about technology, and they have they want to run for office, they're going to believe their campaign people that, they're the best and they can get all these votes and all this stuff. And then they don't. They end up not getting it. And they think that they got robbed or something. And then they blame the ballot. They sue for recounts and all this stuff because they only got 7% or 6.5%. And they thought they were going to get 50% because they gave these other people all this money. And that happens all the time. I mean, I hate to say it, but it happens all the time. So those people would end up suing because they don't understand. But the reality is, if with the voting machines that first came out, Sequoia and all this stuff came out in Diebold, that came out in 2004. There was no paper ballot. There was no paper receipt. When I wrote down I wrote a whole thing up. I don't even want to talk about it. I'll probably get murdered or something. I'm just joking. I said, where's the paper receipt? Inside the machine. You don't want a person leaving with a receipt for who they voted for, because then they can sell that vote. They can say, hey, some candidate can say, hey, I'll give you $100 if you vote for me. And then that's it. And the richest person wins. So that it never works in democracy. But you need an internal paper ballot, a paper receipt. And they didn't have it. I said, where's it? Oh, we don't have the technology for that. I said, cash registers in the 1800s had an internal paper scroller over there, the ledger. And they said, oh, we can't do that. So I also went and pitched to a few states the voting apparatus, the voting machine. And, people who are incumbents do not want to make the system more transparent. That's our job. We have to do this with we have to promote this, not the politicians. The politicians are already inside. They figured out this convoluted system and got in. They don't want to get out. They don't want to make it transparent. It's not good for them because they're going to get, these people are very greedy. They're not, many of them are not patriots, power greedy, and whatever they can accumulate there. And I'm rambling on again, but yeah, I have a voting machine, the blockchain voting machine. I have a patent on it, and I also incorporate, in some iterations of it, I incorporate a paper ballot because people are going to fight the first elections that don't have the paper ballot like they did in 2004. And people deserve, 90-year-old people, 80-year-old people deserve to see the ballot, and then they know someone could count it. Now, the technology has to evolve with the human aspect where the humans actually accept the technology, and that's going to take a little while. But paper is also technology, and after we integrate paper with the blockchain, that's the best of both worlds for now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just to touch on the 5-state pilot projects for blockchain voting that Brock mentioned earlier, I think it's important for us to know that the reason why they started in those 5 states was specifically because there were high numbers of veterans or active military duty citizens that were abroad, and therefore mail-in ballots might not be going to the same place that they originally registered. It might be difficult for them to get to a mailbox depending on where they are. So it was specifically tested for voter access for people that were not physically going to be able to easily get to voting booths. Now, I know how important this is. I actually helped set up with Democrats Abroad the first ever voting booths abroad, so that Americans that were in London, in Hong Kong, all over the world could show up and vote in a voting booth because they didn't have confidence that from another country their mail-in ballot would actually be properly turned in. So we set up and held those voting booths, and a lot of Americans that I met abroad said, hey, this is the first time that I've actually voted because I've never trusted that if I mail this from another country that it's either going to be counted or it's going to get there on time. So I completely agree with you, Nick, that there's going to be this transition period where there are people that need or want the physical voting booth or the piece of paper because they don't yet trust the technology. But because those 5 blockchain pilots, many of them showed to be incredibly successful, so we are now looking at a next phase where I think we're going to be able to roll it out to, I mean, my prediction is at least half of the states in the US are going to have some form of blockchain voting project going into 2022. I really see that as tangible. I see that as possible, and I see it as really exciting. And just to speak to the audience again, if you have any more questions that you'd like to present to us, please add them into the questions or vote up another question you're most interested in. And something else to say is that we would absolutely love to remind you that if you are excited about our movement, if you're excited about what we're doing here, then please donate. Your support is vital to everything that we're doing. So you can click the button at the bottom of the screen that says your support is vital to take you to a donation page, or you can please visit brock.vote if you haven't yet.
Yeah, a couple of other things worth noting, because you bring it up, Nick, and the concern that a lot of our elected officials are there for power and or money. I think it's worth me just commenting briefly as to why I'm doing this. I'm not doing this for money, and I'm not doing this for power. I'm committed to creating a third party, a third major party in this country. I will never be running as a Democrat or a Republican. I believe that is what our nation needs. George Washington, at his closing address, warned us about the risk or the threat of political parties. John Adams and the other founding fathers warned us, like the worst thing that could happen in this country is that 2 political parties became dominant and got control of the system. And that is to a degree where we are. As the government is supposed to be of, for, and by the people. Civil servants. I am running to be a servant. This is to create a movement. I don't care whether or not I end up as president or not. I care that this movement gets momentum to create a viable third party. This is about all of us and giving us a third choice. Binary systems, when you end up with systems of 2 choices, right? Either those 2 systems like magnets come together and you get absolute collusion, or those 2 systems become polarized and become more and more and more divided. That's essentially what we have, and we need a trinity. We need a third option We need to rise above partisan politics and realize that we're in this together and that it's about all of us winning, not just half of us that chose to vote. And so the reason Bloomberg, Mayor Bloomberg, was originally running as an independent candidate. Donald Trump was originally running as an independent candidate. And the major parties always convince, prospects that you need to run under one of their flags or you can't win. I care more about creating a third party than winning, because I think that's what we need. And I'm committed to that mission to the end, and so I'm not doing this for power. I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing this in service to support our country because I am very concerned about our collective future. It looks to me like the road we're on is a road to doom and destruction, but it doesn't have to be that way. If we do something, I recommend checking out this website, liberate.us or liberate.us. And take a look at that video. It's a very, very powerful video. I recommend checking that out. I want to add one other story, just as, from inside the operation. So New York, I mentioned what's going on in Los Angeles, where we are. In New York, you need 15,000 signatures or petitions to get on the ballot as a presidential candidate. 15,000 signatures is a lot of signatures. It's not easy. Most campaigns spend 3 to 4 years, collecting those signatures to get on the ballot. And so in April of this year, in the heart of COVID, as New York was getting hit harder than anywhere in the world, if you were in charge of making these decisions, you'd say, oh, well, people can't go out and go door to door and collect signatures during that moment. So what do? Do you still require 15,000 signatures? Maybe you enable electronic petitioning. There are ways with technology to trust that, you're getting actual signatures. We have all sorts of digital notaries and lots of options, however you want to do it. You could have created a digital solution, or you could have lowered the bar, right? And said, let's go from 15,000 maybe to 1,500 or something to make it easier to protect the integrity of our democratic process. Mm-hmm. And if nothing else, you just leave it the same. Mm-hmm. Guess what New York did in April? They increased the number from 15,000 to 45,000 to ensure that no third-party candidates could get on the ballot. Because, there wasn't enough time left, and in the middle of COVID, what are you going to do? But it gets worse. It gets worse. The only other path to get on the ballot is through one of the political parties, one of the third parties. And so another rule was created that says if you're a third party and you put a candidate on the ballot for president or governor in 2022, and your political candidate doesn't receive at least 130,000 votes in the election, that your party is disbanded. They made it so that no third party wanted to put a candidate on the ballot because their entire existence was at risk if they didn't have a great candidate. These are real examples of things that we see every day as we go through the process of getting on ballots. It's like the bar just keeps getting higher and higher for third parties. But we've got news for you. You can underestimate us. You can try and stop us, but we've got news to come.
Stay tuned.
I was going to say ...
Yeah. And so this is just interesting stuff, and I look forward to continuing to report back to everybody that's interesting our findings, the things that we're seeing. So we've talked about some blockchain-based voting. There was a question from Don here, a viable third party. We completely agree. A third party is what this country desperately needs. We think that there are solutions to these problems, and they're mostly going to be technical. But again, a reminder, the biggest problem we have is that 40% of the eligible voters are not voting. So get involved, rock the vote. Please check us out at brock.vote. There's a question about Illinois and will we be on the ballot? Oh, well, this is an interesting one. We filed our paperwork on time in Illinois to be on the ballot, and they refused to accept our paperwork. They refused to accept it. They rejected our application to be on the ballot, which is interesting. And another courageous third-party candidate, Kanye West, they did accept his paperwork.
And then rejected.
And then they rejected him afterwards. And so Illinois is also clearly doing things to suppress third-party candidates from participating. And so this is not just a Los Angeles issue or New York State issue. It's an Illinois issue. And we'll keep pointing out the problems that we're finding as we go through this process.
I just want to point this out that I've spent a lot of time working both for the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. So I've always worked with candidates that automatically get ballot access because they're with one of the big two parties. This is the first time I've worked in independent politics, and every single day I get more passionate about it because I realize how many hurdles there are to anybody else participating besides Republicans or Democrats. Nearly every state we've gone to, there's been a litany of rules that make it difficult for us to get our name on the ballot or for any third party to start to engage in a higher level way. We really are presented with insane obstacles all of the time. And, I'm just so proud and honored to be a part of this team where, within a short period of time, we have managed to get in the ballot in so many places, despite the enormous obstacles that are presented for third-party access.
Yeah, and those are obstacles that are there every year. This is also in the midst of COVID. So take
I want to say
and make and then square it or cube it. It's
important when we talk about obstacles for me to make this statement. Like people of color, we've had so many different obstacles that we've had to face over and over again. And people have asked me, Karla, why are you doing this? Why at this 9th hour? I am tired. I am sick and tired, right, of us getting into a space and place where we don't know what's under the hood. We don't know, as Nick's pointed to, that there's all sorts of things happening underneath the hood. And this campaign, this movement, guys, we are going to be bringing to you the actual truth of what's taking place, what we're facing day in and day out. And even, frankly, within my own community, who've said to me, why aren't you going in the right direction? And you know what direction that is to go in. And I've had to respond in such a way that Mama raised me, Papa raised me to make a decision fundamentally on what I felt was in alignment. What I don't feel in alignment with right now is people calling each other names. When I was raised as a little girl, to speak kindly to each other, to share with each other, to open up, be honest, figure out how we can work together to get to a solution. The two-party system, literally tearing each other apart, tearing each other in a toxic way, in some cases getting personal. How is it that we try to raise our kids differently than what we are seeing play out? No more. No more. What Brock and I decided we would do, we would commit to do. You will never hear us speaking negatively about the other two candidates that are running. You will never hear us speak negative. We even promised our Indigenous relatives that we would honor those 16 principles of our Native communities. And one of them is not to speak negative, right, about each other. So we're honoring that and we're modeling that. And our only hope and prayer is that you all will come join us, support this movement so we can raise up the standards of how we campaign in this country, to eventually raise up the standards for how we actually get things done, pass legislation, make a difference in our community.
Yeah, and to all the faith-based so communities and individuals out there, there's this concept of grace, and to do things gracefully. And it's so important, individually, right, to be the change you want to see in the world. I encourage each and every one of us to look inward and to really ask ourselves, what are our values? What are our principles? What do we stand for? How do we want to define ourselves and collectively define ourselves as a community, as a group, and how we want to define ourselves as a nation? Because we have the opportunity to reinvent ourselves. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. You can make a change. You can do that. We can make a change. We can bring America together again. I think the answer is in unity. The answer is in dignity and respect. What happened to the days when we could sit down and have conversations with people that we disagreed with? Our differences are wonderful. It's what makes us unique. It's what makes us beautiful. Thank God we don't all agree on everything and we're not all the same. This is where progress comes from. But you can't get to that. You will not bear that fruit if you can't engage in civil discourse, where at the end of the conversation, we can agree to disagree about something, but at least we understand the perspective of the other party. And through that understanding, we can find a path forward. We can find compromise that leads to real progress. I encourage everyone to just remember this individually. When someone has a different perspective from you, to remember to treat them with dignity and respect, hear what they have to say, share your perspective, where you're coming from and why you feel that way. And through that process, we can make progress. It's so simple. And think about also what you want in your leaders. What is a leader, right? I don't want rulers. I don't want bosses. That's what our founding fathers did, is they, created this republic with a democratic process so that we could, not be ruled by kings. And so I want leaders. I want stewards. I want custodians. And so what is leadership? Leadership to me is vision. It's being able to share an inspiring message that teaches us something, educates us, but also identifies a problem, but specifically delivers solution-oriented conversations. Like, what do we do? And we're not always going to have the best answer. We're not always going to have the right answer, but we can find it's not that complicated. And there are many, many, many Americans that are very, very smart that have solutions to the many, many problems we currently face. That's not our issue. But for whatever reason, the solutions we know around all of these issues are not being implemented. Mm-hmm. Our government is not implementing it. I mean, it's through each election you watch half the voters feeling like they lost and half the voters feeling like they win. And when your team wins, you think that things are going to get better, but it doesn't feel to me like things are getting better. It feels like it just kind of goes back and forth and things are getting worse. We need real change. And it shouldn't be, for me to win, you have to lose. Right. Let's find an all-win solution. The path forward isn't left or right. It's onward and upward together. I think it's always important to share this because we only have the power to change ourselves. Right. But through our actions, we have the ability to inspire others to be better than they currently are. And each one teach one. It's basic stuff. We don't. You're not going to see us speaking negatively. I don't want to see my elected officials all trash talking each other. I want to see people. You can trash talk me. I'll mostly just smile and I'll respond with something hopefully inspiring, educational, or solution-oriented that actually shows us a path forward.
And I think it's so important that you point out that what we're doing here in this campaign, in this movement, in this pushing forth with a true viable third party, that this is based on identifying the current obstacles that we have and presenting real, tangible, implementable solutions. So today in this town hall, we've talked through historic obstacles, current obstacles that we have for voting to be successful in this country. And we've started to identify some short-term solutions and some longer-term solutions. In the short term, we are spending so much time on voter education and voter engagement. So what's the difference between that? Voter education is teaching people how to vote. How do you register at home? How do you get your ballot on time? How do you fill it out correctly and make sure that you turn it back in on time and declare that you have voted? So there is some sort of external data set. But then how do you engage people? Brock rightly pointed out that over 40% of eligible voters are not voting. So we are here to inspire a whole new generation of voters that maybe has never voted before, maybe has been politically apathetic for a while because they just didn't feel like their voice was heard and that they were a part of the process. We are here to get people engaged in politics again or for the first time. So voter education and engagement is very important to our entire strategy here. And for longer term strategies, we talk through what are the technology solutions that we can implement into the voting infrastructure so that eventually we have transparent, immutable ledgers of who voted. We can be using digital identity solutions so that physical pieces of paper or plastic are not anyone's obstacle to participating in their democracy. So there's a lot of things that we're looking at here and working on here to make sure that we can address as many issues as possible within our movement.
Yeah, and so there's another question about, the third party, our third party, are we going to be defining that? Are we going to be announcing that? And so the answer is yes. Parties, and this is one of the challenges we face too, most candidates, when they choose to run for office, have an entire party apparatus to support them. We're having to build everything, which is no small feat. Everything from getting on ballots is difficult. So the deck is definitely stacked against us, but that doesn't stop us. We are the crazy ones that will attempt it all. But another thing that's very specific to political parties is their ideologies, right? And when you choose to run on a particular ideological platform, a lot of that's already defined.
It's so true.
Right? We are defining something new. Mm-hmm. And I invite you to participate in this conversation as we create a new ideology around unity, around real progress, inclusivity, transparency. These are trust, truth. So please join us as we define this ideology for this new renewal of a third party where we have the potential to redefine ourselves individually, as a nation, as a party, to create the real change we want to see in the world. And so, yes, that'll all be done before Election Day, so you know what you're signing up for, but also knowing that this is not a static thing. This is a living thing that will evolve with you, with us, as we keep redefining and evolving the future to create the future that we all want to live in. And it's also worth pointing out, whatever happens in this election on November 3rd, we have a strategy, one that no candidate has ever tried before, which is to go for bronze and to try to win a single state, 2 or 3, which is viable. It is possible. This is a possible strategy, but more than anything, we are laying the groundwork for this movement, this third party choice. And in the year 2022, I'm committed to supporting 100 candidates, at least, up and down the ticket across the nation from a local, state, and federal perspective. And I invite you to ask yourself if you could be one of those people. One of the things that the thing that is giving me great affirmation and incredible conviction around the work that we're doing here is people are telling me for the first time, they're like, Brock, I never thought I could, play a role in politics. Mm-hmm. They're like, I'm starting to think about maybe I should run for city council, or someone else is like, hey, maybe I could be mayor. Maybe I could be mayor. Maybe I could, get in the state Senate, state Congress. Maybe I could be a governor, because we need diversity in our government. We need more people that have engineering backgrounds, business backgrounds, philanthropic backgrounds, art backgrounds. We need a government of, for, and by the people. All of the people, all of us. We need diversity in our government. And so I invite you to ask yourself, could you be one of those people one day? And if you're a parent, to teach your kids that could be them one day. Because this is the real change that we need. Is we need more people participating and showing up in service, to be civil servants. I am doing this, and if by the grace of God, I find myself in a position to be a steward, to be a custodian for some period of time, I am not going to stay in government for the rest of my life. I will term limit myself out and go back to helping people in every other way I possibly can. And so I think these are all points worth noting. And so it's with, I will be running again in 2024. And by the time we get to the 2024 election, we will have an entire infrastructure in place to have a truly viable third party, that can hopefully make it into the debates if we can get that piece of this fixed as well. And hopefully we have a bunch of independent candidates that win in the midterm elections in 2022 to continue to give more fuel to this momentum, put more fuel on this fire. If ever there was a moment we need change, it certainly feels to me like this is the 11th hour. And remember, running the government is our birthright. Right? It is our inheritance. This goes from generation to generation. Each generation is a custodian. Their job is to steward and custodian the system until it gets passed down. This decade, the visionary 20s, or these potentially soaring 20s, is the decade where our generations are going to assume the responsibility. And wow, what a difficult time. This is probably the most challenging time in human history. The decisions we make right now matter a great deal. We face multiple existential threats individually, as a nation, and as a species, as a humanity. The decisions we make right now are going to affect, it's going to decide the fate of humanity. And so if ever there was a moment to get involved, if ever there was a moment to get out there and vote.
The time is now.
The time is now.
The time is now. And so that concludes our National Town Hall today. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We're so pleased to see so many supporters engaging with us on Crowdcast and across all of the rest of our streaming platforms. We do our National Town Halls every single week, and we're doing mini town halls on other days to address specific issues and also to celebrate the work that we're doing in different states across the country. So I have a few asks. One is that please engage with us. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. We want you to get involved. So if you can go to Brock.vote or any of our social media channels to follow us, see when we're going to be in your state, what we're up to, what are the next events you can engage with. Please volunteer. And of course, please donate, so that we can get our message out to as many voters and first-time voters, turning people into new voters than ever before. So every little bit counts. Even $1 makes a big difference. So thank you guys so much.
Well, it's the concept of being bought in. Thank you, Brittany Kaiser. Thank you, Karla Ballard. And thank you, Nick Spanos, and every one of you for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.